The harbinger of us all, the first man and bringer of words. All Nords know the tale of Ysgramor well. Once a refugee of a far-off civil war, his lineage came to shape the entire continent of Tamriel. Through blood and battle, the Atmoran king held steadfast to his piece of Skyrim in the Merethic era. Even in death, he watches over his descendants from Sovngarde, the ancient king whose bloodline is claimed by many amongst the Nordic royalty of today. Hello and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. My name is Scott and today we're taking a look at the long-standing legacy of the first human ruler of Skyrim, Ysgramor. It's this very legacy that is held proudly thousands of years later that makes Ysgramor so interesting, as without him, man may never have risen to power in Tamriel. But what is legacy without a life worthy of one? Ysgramor and his two sons' adventures have become cemented in legend for the people of Skyrim, channeling the nationalistic sentiment held by many Nords to this day. Ysgramor was born in Atmora, a continent to the northwest of Tamriel, the far-off land that holds a great deal of importance in the mythology of the Nords, referred to as the Land of Truth, and appearing in creation myths. In the Merethic era, this continent was plunged into an unknown war, causing Atmorans to seek refuge where they could. As the people were seafarers, the trip to Skyrim was made by many. Ysgramor and his two sons Ingol and Ilgar were among the early travellers, helping to establish the settlement of Sarthal in the north of the province. Living in peace away from the fear that had taken hold of their homeland, the population boomed. They sought to explore and settle around their small foothold, growing the town they now called home. Tragedy struck, though, in what came to be known as the Night of Tears. The Snow Elves descended upon Sarthal and sacked the city, killing all Atmorans who'd called the small settlement home, save for Ysgramor and his two sons. The elven attack was motivated by one of two things: fear of the growth of Atmorans on the continent and the rumoured discovery of an ancient power beneath the settlement. We now know this power to be the Eye of Magnus, but the Atmorans had no idea what they'd found, and buried it. As you'd expect with an atrocity like this, opinions differ on whether the massacre was provoked or not. It's impossible to say why exactly the Snow Elves delivered such a fierce blow, but their attack was soon answered with escalation. Ysgramor and his sons managed to escape the slaughter, taking a longboat and sailing back to Atmora. They arrived to find the conflict they'd fled was over and told the people of what happened at Sarthal. He spoke of the strange Snow Elves, the wondrous new land, and the fierce attack they could not forgive. The warriors who survived the Atmoran War were without cause to fight for, many leaping at the opportunity to avenge their people and colonize the new continent. Ysgramor raised an army known to history as the 500 Companions, making preparations for their journey across the sea. After sailing out into the open ocean, the fleet was met with a fierce storm. The two longboats under the command of Ingol and Ilgar were separated from the rest of the chaos. While Ilgar made it back to safety, Ingol was thrown off course and sailed into the Sea of Ghosts, north of Skyrim. This passage is filled with icebergs, but also the fabled sea ghosts. While it's likely the ghosts are metaphorical, the passage destroyed Ingol and his crew. Ysgramor searched tirelessly for his son in the Sea of Ghosts until he found the longboat and the dead it carried. He would later bury his son in a barrow near Winterhold. The barrow could be seen from the main keep, letting Ysgramor watch over his son's resting place from his throne. After landing on Skyrim, the 500 Companions readied themselves for the fight ahead. Before they were able to march on Sarthal, they were approached by a young man named Azadal. He was a survivor of the initial settlement who left prior to the massacre in order to train under the elves to master enchanting. Having lost his family in the elven attack, he sought revenge and offered his services to enchant the armor and weapons of the Atmorans. His skill in enchanting surpassed all in the realm at this point, and the Atmorans were better equipped than ever to deliver the revenge he craved. Azadal is an important name here, as he'd later become a dragon priest, and may help to explain how man ended up in the service of dragons. More on that a little later. The blades of the Atmorans struck home, tasting the blood of elves who slaughtered their countrymen only months prior. Ysgramor's historic victory against the Snow Elves at Sarthal was the conduit for change in Tamriel as a whole. The Snow Elves were driven underground into a deal with the Dwemer, lest they be driven to extinction as they were hunted all across Skyrim. The Circle of Captains was established, breaking up units of captains and their crews and sending them out into Tamriel to hunt and settle. The Atmorans quickly spread throughout Skyrim and into Solstheim, killing elves and widening the grasp they held on the continent. Ysgramor's death marked the end of a period in the Merethic era known as the Return. that kicked off with the return to Skyrim. Legend says that the mythic king's last breath was marked by a storm that spanned the entire continent of Tamriel. The news travelled fast as messengers travelled to the companions spread into the continent, telling them of the king's death. For indeed the stories tell that Rorlak, the most battle-hardened and unflinching of all captains, did collapse with grief, and never again lifted his mighty axe, and all around Tamriel, as the news spread as a dark cloud washes from horizon to horizon, did brilliant lights go out in silent honour of their fallen general and war leader. Given that all of this happened in the Merethic era, the mythology associated with him makes his legacy all the more important. The very story we just explained about Ysgramor already has the fable treatment. Ysgramor wasn't the first person to set foot on Skyrim, nor was his campaign against the elves some noble quest, but history is written by the victor, and here the races of man got their chance to stand in Tamriel. Elevating Ysgramor in folklore, he's often spoken about with his antagonist being the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, Hermaeus Mora. The Atmorans called him the Woodland Man, but he's a regular character in Nordic stories. He's known to tempt those curious for knowledge into his realm of Apocrypha, their hunger for power sentencing them to an eternity in his realm. In one story, Ysgramor was hunting a white stag, but Hermaeus sought to trick the king into becoming an elf. When the beast ran off, Hermaeus appeared to him as a rabbit, offering to lengthen his ears so he could hear where the stag had gone. Before he could be fooled, a fox appeared, killing the rabbit. It spoke to him. "Know thou, mortal, that I am sure," and this was nary hare, but indeed Herma Mora, who did nearly trick thee into becoming of elven kind. Rely you hereafter, mortal, upon the forthright methods of man, and eschew the tricks of the elves, lest ye become one. Most importantly though, Ysgramor is cited as the man who gave the men of Skyrim words to record their history and legend. He's recognised as the first historian of man, so it's no wonder he's presented in such a prolific way at the start of Skyrim's history. He saw the elves passing the wisdom, learning and knowledge of the people into word, and passing it forward, so he sought the means to allow humans to do the same. Therefore I strung long launcher with the woeful bowstring, and sought the marches of the east, where dwelt Faldrosta, the great snow goose, and I slew her with a hawk-fletched dart, and plucked of her a great quill, which I used to write down my speech as I had seen the elves do, and I vowed that henceforth all men would record their ideas and thoughts, just as Shor carved a record of his victory over Sneck into the side of the shivering glacier, and in this way would the best ways of killing elves be preserved. But what good is recorded history without the means for your people to survive and flourish? This brings us to the second pillar of Ysgramor's legacy, creating a foothold for mankind in Tamriel. The companions brought across with Ysgramor likely brought their families across either on the first landing or soon after, and the people began to settle the land. Their culture bled into the realm, constructing the holds of Skyrim to strengthen their grip on the country. This success as a whole encouraged mass emigration from Atmora, further bolstering the Nordic population. By the First Era, year 240, Skyrim had risen in opposition to the powerful and ancient elven dynasties already on Tamriel. Vraga the Gifted had conquered Skyrim, High Rock, and Morrowind in the name of men, and the first true challenge to elven dominance could begin. Alesia led her rebellion against their Aelid slave masters with the help of the Nords and some Aelid nobles, and they succeeded in liberating the men of Cyrodiil. They would go on to establish the first Cyrodiilic Empire in the First Era, year 243, when they took the White Gold Tower, her victory forever changing the balance of power in Tamriel. The 8 Divines were founded, incorporating much of the Nordic pantheon and tying the Nords and the Needs together. One could argue that without Ysgramor, the power of Skyrim, and the support of the people who called it home, Alesia may never have been given the opportunity that she had. The final pillar of Ysgramor's legacy is the dynasty of kings that followed after him. His direct line ruled over Skyrim and many other parts of Tamriel up until the First Era, year 369. In this time, the Nords enjoyed the peak of their power, heights that would never be returned to even in the Fourth Era. Presumably, the only time that Ysgramor's descendants weren't in complete power was during the Dragon's occupation of the North. While not likely to give up power easily, the Atmorans were already animal worshippers on their home continent. They brought with them this veneration of the beast, and it's likely that this led them into the dragon cult. The spread of the dragon cult likely happened after the death of Ysgramor, when Ilgar was in power, and Skyrim was ordered into the holds that would be overseen by dragon priests. It may have also helped them down the path of dragon worship, knowing that Azadal went on to become a prominent leader of the dragon cult after helping them in their conquest of Sarthal. The Dragon War would have swiftly put an end to the veneration of the beasts who subjugated the populace by the time of King Harold, 13th of Ysgramor's line. The last holds of the dragon cult were stamped out by his destruction of their last monastery, Falhost. King Harold was well known for formally relinquishing all ties to Atmora. It was with Harold that Skyrim and the Nords truly became the Nords of Skyrim. By the end of his reign, in the year 221 of the First Era, he'd launched a final campaign against the Snow Elves and lived to be 108. Where Ysgramor was the catalyst that set men in motion, Harold was the solidifier to cement his legacy on Tamriel. King Hjalmar followed on from his father Harold after his death in year 221. His succession was the first time the Moot was ever called, starting the tradition of meeting to choose the next High King. Hjalmar would only rule for a year before he died, his younger brother Vrage donning the crown. Dubbed Vrage the Gifted, in the First Era, year 240, he led a sizable expansion into the provinces of Tamriel. We spoke about this earlier, but his drive for conquest helped push man into their strongest position at the time. Within 50 years, Skyrim ruled all of northern Tamriel. Geller followed on as king from Vrage, demonstrating a similar taste for conquest by fighting against the Dwemer in subterranean Skyrim predominantly. Geller was praised for his tactical mind, and the Dwemer were no easy fight. Borgus of Winterhold was the last direct descendant of Ysgramor, and his death in the First Era, year 369, is regarded as the end of Skyrim's true power in the realm. He was incredibly controversial because he outlawed the traditional Nordic pantheon in favor of the doctrines of the Elysian Order. He went to Cyrodiil to join a war with the Empire against the Cameron dynasty of Valenwood, but he would meet his end here. His death at the hands of the Bosmer Wild Hunt plunged Skyrim into internal conflict, known as the War of Succession. This conflict raged until the First Era, year 420, when the Pact of Chieftains crowned Olaf One-Eye as the new High King. The direct line of the Atmorans had gotten muddy, and the Elysians had grown to be the new power in the realm. It was during this conflict that their grip on High Rock, Morrowind, and Cyrodiil was removed, the other races of men or elves taking back leadership. Even though his direct family was gone, Ysgramor's heritage is still claimed by the rulers of the Nords, for symbolic reasons, if nothing else. It's not only in large ways his legacy lives on, there are several relics of his lineage that have survived the eras. The soup spoon of Ysgramor is kept in Calixto's House of Curiosities in Windhelm. Despite actually being a fork, it's on display to further the mythical name of the king. Now I know what you're thinking, this is no spoon, it's a fork, says Calixto. Nobody can eat soup with a fork. Well, my friend, you did not know Ysgramor. More powerful than his fork is the axe, Wuthrad, which translates to Storm Tears. It was carried by Ysgramor in his return to Sarthal. According to legend, the axe was forged by Ingol for his father the day after the Night of Tears. Ysgramor's tears for his people were pure ebony, the material Ingol forged in the lightning for heating and sea for cooling. The axe was born of his wrath and sadness, empowering the companions fighting behind it. The weapon increases damage to elves, and perhaps it was Azadal who made this enchantment. But it was not only the elves this mighty weapon slew. Many a giant, including the legendary Sinmur, would be felled by a swing of this legendary axe. The weapon was shattered into several pieces at some point after the return, displayed by the Fourth Era companions in Jorrvaskr to honor their founder. It would go on to be reforged by a member of the companions living once more to deliver Ysgramor's wrath. It's also worth noting that there is a shield of Ysgramor, which is one of the largest shields in the game, speaking volumes of Ysgramor's strength. Perhaps he was even strong enough to wield Wuthrad in one hand and the shield in the other. And there you have it, the legacy of Ysgramor explained, the Merethic-era Atmoran who outran conflict, then walked headstrong into another, choosing to lead his people into a new world. He brought man to a continent dominated by the elves, and his bloodline would change the political landscape of Tamriel forevermore. Whether his story is as grand as told or embellished by legend, it doesn't really matter. The impact his story has had on Nordic culture all the way up to the Fourth Era is arguably unparalleled. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please give it a like, and do head down into the comments and let us know what lore topics you would love to see covered in the future. Thanks again, subscribe for more awesome Elder Scrolls content. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.